Learning some advanced or complex React hooks like the useReducer hook can be very challenging. So in this video, we will see how to use the useReducer hook. So useReducer is a hook that lets you add a reducer to your component. Now reducer is a single function that contains all the state update logic for a component with many states. This hook is just like useState, but to be used on a large scale project where maintaining states is a big hassle. Let's just code and understand everything about it. So as you can see here we have an example where I'm using only useState to manage the states of this component. We have basically two states, one is name and one is age, and I'm changing the name state using this input box where I can write like F code and this will be printed. I can manipulate with age also using this increment and decrement buttons. And here I'm just using some functions and the function that we get from the useState to manage the state, right? We can do these same things using useReducer also. So let me just write the code using useReducer. Now, as you can see, I'm not using useState anymore. Instead, I'm using this useReducer and I'm able to manage the states using this. So let's just understand what this useReducer takes as parameter, what it returns, how it works. Okay, so first, let's just look at what it takes as parameters, right? Now useReducer takes two parameters. One is a reducer, which is a function, and another is an object, which is the initial state, right? Like here I have defined the state of the component. And since we will have a lot of states in this component, hence, we will be using objects for putting the states inside this useReducer in most of the times. We don't use useReducer like in this case, like in this example, we should not be using useReducer because we only have two states. So managing two states is very easy, right? But what if we had 6 or 10 states? Then managing them would have been a hassle, right? But just to showcase how this useReducer is used, I'm using only two states to show you how to manage these. Now this first function is a reducer. Now as I said earlier, a reducer is the function, the single function which contains all the state update logic for the component. Now as you can see here, this is the reducer function that we have for this component, and we can see that we have this switch case inside this. Now just wait a minute, I'll explain everything down here and then we'll go back up to here explaining why we have this switch cases over here. So here the initial state is 24 for the age and for the name it is John. So when the page will load for the first time, the viewer will see that John is written over here and 24 will be over here. And then he can just change things as he likes. Now we're done with the parameters of useReducer. Let's see what this useReducer actually returns. Now just like useState, useReducer also returns an array which have two elements, a state and a function. Now this state is the state which the component has upon render, okay? And this dispatch is a function which helps us manage or modify the state of the component. So as you can see down here, we have three functions which all have this dispatch function written over here, right? Now let's just look at what this dispatch function is. Now dispatch function is just a function which lets us modify the state of the component. Now this dispatch functions, it also takes a parameter, an object basically. And this object is just an action type which helps us know that what this dispatch function is supposed to do. Like here, type is incremented age. Now this type incremented age is particularly telling us that this dispatch function will only be incrementing the age state of this component by clicking this button. Similarly, here in this handle decrease function, this dispatch function is only going to reduce the age or decrease the age by clicking this minus button. Now this handle input change function has this dispatch which is telling us that this dispatch function will help us in changing the name state of this component. Now upon looking at this dispatch function closely, we can see that we have a next name property inside this object parameter of dispatch. Now what is this? Well, As you can see that this next name property has a value of e.target.value. Now, if you come over here, here in this input, you can see that I'm using this handle input change over here on change of the value of this input, right? Now, when we used to use the useState, we used to do the same thing where we used to put the set name change or set input change function over here, and then we used to set this e.target value as that current state of the component, the name state of the component, right? Similarly, we are just passing down this value inside this object, and we will be able to access that value inside this reducer function. Now, let's just look at this reducer function over here. This reducer function has two parameters, a state and action. Now, basically this action, it is just telling us what to do whenever we are calling this dispatch function. Similarly over here. And the state, it is just the current state on that render of that component. Now we are using this switch case because our dispatch function has different types, right? So if the type of the dispatch function is incremented age, we want this to happen, and if it is decremented age, we want this to happen, and if it is changed name, we want this to happen. Or just keeping a default state, like if something else happens, we don't want to do anything, and we just want to return that current state of the component again. By this, we are just preventing any other case or any other state change to happen. This is a very good way to prevent mishaps while developing. Now, if we look more closely into this reducer function, now since this action parameter is an object which has different properties, like this type property or this next name property, which we set inside the handle input change function over here, where we were just basically accessing the input value of this input. Now remember, we will always return an object as a state whenever the initial state that you passed inside this useReducer was an object. Like in this case, the initial state was an object, right? Yeah, now coming back to this reducer. Now, as you can see, like if I just modify the age property over here, okay, let's just write state.age, not this, state.age is equal to state.age plus 1. Now, since this case was just to increment the age, I have incremented the age. Now what if instead of returning this complete object, I do something like this, return state. Now this will not work because here the state is not editable. Like we cannot edit the state over here in this case. We will have to return a new object. We cannot just return the original, like the previous state we had inside this reducer as parameter. We cannot do that. We will return a new object where the state will be manipulated inside that return value, okay? Because if I just return this state, this reducer function will return the not manipulative version of the state, which is not what we desired, right? So let me just remove it and just uncomment this return value and remove this also. So as you can see, I'm returning the name as it was because I'm just incrementing the age, and the age property is getting manipulated. Similarly, in case of this decremented age, here also age is only manipulated, and here inside this change name, you can see that I'm returning the state object, and here inside the name, I have changed the name to action.nextName, where this next name was this value, the inputs value, okay? Well, this was just to show you how this useReducer works and what all properties and parameters and what all things we require for this useReducer. Well, thanks for watching this video, and if you have any doubt regarding this useReducer hook, you can just ask me in the comments. And also, if you want to learn more about React, then a sub to this channel will be really appreciated.